वैसे मैं दुनिया में किसी से नहीं डरती, एक खुदा के अलावा, पर एक चीज़ से मुझे बड़ा डर लगता है, TAX। तो ये जो अगला सेशन है, ये मेरा मोस्ट फेवरेट सेशन होने वाला है. I'm very honored to invite on stage this tax expert who is of great frame, and he is renowned for what he does. He has been the Deputy CEO of KPMG. He's also been the Deputy CEO of RSM. He is the founder of Dhruva Advisors, which is one of India's most respected and, of course, largest regulatory and tax advisory houses. They advise several multinational organizations and several leading Indian business houses on the matters of business, tax, and regulation. They also advise the Government of India on policy matters with regarding taxation. He himself was named as the Asia Tax Practice Leader of the Year by International Tax Review. बहुत किस्मत वाले हैं हम that he's coming to talk to us. We're very fortunate to have him here on the JITO Converge stage. बहुत सारी तालियों के साथ हम मंच पे स्वागत करेंगे श्री दिनेश कनाबार जी का. We thank him for joining us here. जोरदार तालियां हो जाए. Good evening, sir. You're my most favorite person in the whole world.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Can I have the clicker? And can you put the presentation on? A very, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Delighted to be here. And when I came here, I thought that JITO was an organization which was focused on trade, connectivity, etc. And for the last 45 minutes, what I heard about all of you doing such a lot of good work, whether it is in the field of education, which is very, very dear to me, or so many other things that you are doing, it really made me feel great that I'm part of this function today. Thank you so much, and clap all the best to all of you. So, when we start talking about succession planning, that's the subject today, the first thing which comes to mind, there was this mention which I heard earlier 15 minutes back, that if you do this, तो उसका जो आपको पुण्य मिलेगा, ये जन्म में भी नहीं, अगले जन्म में भी मिलेगा. So we all believe in succession in a variety of ways. All of us, in India particularly, when we say that we are accumulating wealth, we want to do two things. We want to use that for good causes in the current life, and we want to ensure that that wealth is available to our children, etc. And how do we do that? What I'm going to do over the next 40 minutes that have been allotted to me, and I will not over on time at all, is to provide to you some items that I have experienced working with some of the biggest business houses in this country. What are the learnings? What is it that one does to ensure a proper succession planning? Let me first begin with this proposition about family business. We are all running family businesses. And generally, there is this whole thing to say that there are professional businesses and there are family businesses. And most people tend to look down on family businesses, which is absolutely incorrect. Because you'll be very, very surprised if I tell you that when you think of a country like USA, the biggest names which sort of come to our mind is Microsoft and Apple and whatever else, and we believe that there are no family businesses in USA, whereas in India we have a lot of family businesses. And nothing can be farther from truth. In fact, 59% of the GDP of USA is controlled by family businesses. And in India, the percentage is even higher. We have about 79% of the GDP. So we can go on talking about, and the Prime Minister can keep on talking about how India is growing to be the third largest economy. What are we doing? 5 trillion, 10 trillion by whichever year. We must realize that 80%, almost 80% of that wealth is created by family businesses. That's the reality of the situation. India has the third largest number of family businesses. And when we speak of listed companies, 75% of the publicly traded companies are family businesses. That's a reality. And the fact of the matter is that it is these family businesses run appropriately which are the best professionally managed businesses. However, there are two things which stand out. And these two things are really negative, and which is what we are going to talk about today. That less than 10% of the family businesses make it to the third generation. We have first generation, then children come in, and then when grandchildren come in, we start experiencing the fact that there are discords within the family and the business does not continue. And this is particularly true where families have multiple businesses and multiple family members involved. That's when challenges start to happen. Of course, in nuclear families, you've got a family, you've got one child, and that child takes on the business, happens all the time. But there are more children, there are children getting married, their spouses come in, etc. And that's when challenges start to come in. And what we have observed, this is out of sheer experience, and we probably work with hundreds and hundreds of family businesses helping them on succession plan. We have found that not more than 1 in 5 businesses have a succession plan. We believe that children can come in, children can do whatever they want to do, and there does not need to be a formal succession plan, and nothing can be farther from truth. Because unless you have a well laid out plan for the succession, nothing can go right. And I'm not necessarily talking about taxes, I'm talking about succession of business in general. There are some of the clippings from newspaper, and all of you know about it. You will see how when succession happens, there are discords. And funny as it may appear, there is one thing which stands out on this slide. The discords which arise are in businesses. So you find industrialists who are so much wise people fighting. You find lawyers fighting among themselves. And you find people who have been based overseas and are exposed to the whole world, again fight among themselves. So it is all pervasive. The issue is that if you have not planned properly, and sometimes even the best laid plans can go haywire, but if you have not planned properly, the chances of ensuring a proper succession are almost not there. When you start speaking about succession planning, there are two types of things which come in. One is we have assets. So every family over a period of time accumulates wealth, whether that wealth is in the form of land, whether that form is liquid assets, whether it is in the form of art, jewelry, whatever else. That's easier to manage because you can go back and say that I have got 1,000 crores of rupees or whatever that number, so-and-so will get X, so-and-so will get Y, and all of that continues thereafter. But what becomes more difficult is when you start talking about family businesses. And how does one ensure succession in a business? Because in a business, what you need to ensure is that the people who are in a position to run the business, people who are capable of running the business, are the people who are allowed to run the business. And again, I can share some very practical examples with you. Take, for example, Mahindra and Mahindra. We all know how successful that company is. Its shares are at an all-time high. Anand Mahindra is regarded as one of the stalwarts in the industry. But many of us may not necessarily realize that when Anand Mahindra came on the scene, it was actually his uncle Keshav Mahindra whose family owned bulk of the shares of Mahindra and Mahindra. And the question for Anand Mahindra was that I have got no more than 1 or 1.5% equity in the company. My uncle, who has got 2 daughters and who are not interested in the family business, have 22% of the shareholding. What am I working for? Am I creating wealth for somebody else? And what if one fine day my uncle decides to sell the shares? What will happen to me? Where will the company go? And to credit of Keshav Mahindra, this is all in the public domain. What I'm telling you is not a secret. To the credit of Keshav Mahindra, he walked up to Anand and said, you are the person best equipped to run the business. You are the person who will make my wealth grow. I commit to you that while you are running the business, I will not sell the shares. And if I do sell the shares, I will ensure that you first have a right to buy it before it goes to anybody else. So how do families come together to ensure that the most capable person runs the business, creates wealth and value for everybody, rather than to see that succession happens just in a manner without taking into account who's capable? There is an either equal division or whatever else. So let's move. What have we seen? What have we seen in our experience as to why does proper succession not happen in a business? The first thing is resistance to change. The youth of today does not have as much patience as many of us had. If I talk about my own profession, it took you about 20 years before you could make a partner in a professional services firm. You tell somebody who's qualified recently that you have to wait for 20 years to become a partner, he will run away. People want things in a hurry. At the same time, business requires maturity. How do you marry that? Also, we are all aware, for example, that there was a point of time when it took years. I was hearing Sidhuji talking about toiling and hard work. And sure, without toiling, without hard work, nothing happens. But the fact of the matter is, I had a team of two youngsters walking into my office, 18 years and 21 years, just newly qualified, whatever. And they had created a technology platform which was valued at $2.5 billion, and they were seeking a round of investment for it. 18 years, 21 years, two friends working together, creating a technology platform. Business has changed. The way we do business has changed. The youth is in a hurry. The youth does not have patience. And we are very resistant to change. We are not changing with times. And that's where succession planning becomes very, very difficult. Failure to manage conflict. Very interestingly, we try to put things under the carpet. Somebody is unhappy, ho jayega. Let it take its own time. It doesn't resolve. Family conflicts don't get resolved. We try to put things under the carpet, leave it for a later day. Things doesn't work. But most important, how do you inculcate, how do you induct people into the business? And there is no one right answer. There are family businesses, for example, where the youth is brought in, allowed to work on the shop floor, and I can give you several examples which I have seen personally, where people are brought into the business, allowed to run a division of business, allowed to run a branch of business, and thereafter inducted, brought on board, not put right at the top to say, just because you happen to be my son or a daughter, you're sitting as a managing director of a company. How does one get inculcated? How does one ensure that there is an appropriate training? Again, one of the most important things, again, is not defining roles and responsibilities. My two colleagues here, Umesh and Deepesh, who are with me here, are working on succession planning for one of the most wealthy families in this country. There's a father, a son, and a daughter. And the question is, how does the father inherit? Both of them are in business. And how does the father inherit the wealth, which is primarily comprising of the equity of this listed company and which is running into billions and billions of dollars between son and a daughter? Unless the roles of the people are defined properly, unless you are addressing these issues head on, you will not be able to do proper succession planning. This is probably the most important slide, and I might just want you to focus on this, because what we have found, as I said, if there is a single business, nuclear family, just one or two members, things become very easy. But take, for example, multiple businesses. Take, for example, and this is sort of in the public domain, and I'm not discussing that, but just to give you an example, that we are all aware of, for example, Reliance. 3 children, all three in businesses, and 7 businesses. You have got retail, you have got telecom, you have got financial services, you have got petroleum, you are getting into green energy, whatever else. How do you create a situation where people can be together and ensure that you are able to run the business in a frictionless manner? And I'll put 2 comments to you. The most important thing that we have seen where success happens is when you create a family constitution. What happens in a family constitution is where you come back and say, I have got these children, I have got multiple businesses, but my children will let the businesses run, they will sit at the top. One of the children may be involved in the business, another may not. So you may go back and say that I have got two children, for example, and one of them wants to run the business, other wants to be a musician. Happens. I mean, it's not in your control. But you want the wealth to be between two of them. How do you ensure that the person who is in business gets paid a compensation for running the business, at the same time the wealth is divided in an appropriate manner? So again, going back to this example, that if you have got multiple businesses, and go back to the example of Reliance, which I mentioned, X person is running telecom, Y is running retail, and there is so much funds which are available. How will allocation of funds happen? And again, the family constitution is the most important document which brings all the different families, Birlas. So many businesses, each vying for funds. Telecom wants funds, retail wants funds, everything else, rayon manufacturer, cement manufacturer wants funds. How do you allocate resources? How do family members sit together? How do the family members divide their roles and responsibilities, and how do they ensure that they are able to work as a team? And there are some very interesting learning examples. I mentioned earlier that not more than 10% of the families in India go to the third generation. But there are several of them which have done it. And are there learnings from there? And the answer is yes. If you look at the Murugappa group, if you look at the TVS group, etc., there are fourth, fifth generation. What have they put together to ensure that wealth goes down, people are inducted into the business, and thereafter it is ensured that succession continues on an ongoing basis? So family constitution, putting a proper mechanism that if dispute happens, what will happen? To assume that your children will all have the same point of view is not going to happen. Because there are people have different aspirations. Somebody wants to grow fast, somebody wants to grow slowly, somebody wants to have family time, somebody wants to work 24/7. How do you put together that mechanism? If there are disputes, how does a mediation happen? How does arbitration happen? How do you involve seniors to come and advise the family? You'll be very, very surprised if I tell you that there are schools where you can actually train people to say how to work as a family in harmony with each other. How do you resolve those conflicting views? Becomes very, very critical, very, very important. So number of things, as you can see out here, we are talking about sort of separating control, ownership, because that's very, very important. Again, there are structures which become very, very important. So for example, if there are different members of the family, and as we go along, we are going to talk about trust, etc. How do you ensure that the ownership is common, and once the fruits of ownership are done, they are distributed in a manner that people can do what they want to do? We have seen families, for example, where one of the family members will come back and say, I want to have a house in London. The other guy is a very simple guy, he doesn't want to do any such thing. How do you allow that to happen? How do you ensure that these views, which are so very conflicting, can exist together without disrupting the business? Because the day the business, the day the family issues start impacting each other, the businesses start coming to a halt, the business start coming to a grinding failure. And we want to ensure that it doesn't happen. How do you ensure that withdrawal of money happens in a proper manner? One family member will come back and say, we have earned so much, let's declare 80% dividend. Somebody will come back and say, no, the money needs to be plowed back into business. How do you ensure all of that? How does one succeed wealth? And this is very, very interesting part. We are all aware, and I'm not going into technicalities here, that if people die intestate, and we are all Jains here, the Hindu Succession Act applies to us. And under Hindu Succession Act, if a person dies intestate, and I have seen such examples where wealthiest of the people have died intestate. There is one interesting comment I must make here, that somehow there is a belief when you go and tell somebody that you need to prepare a will, that you regard it as upshukan. The moment you have to prepare a will, as if there is something preparation for a death, and there is nothing like that. You need to prepare yourself for all eventualities. So if a Hindu male dies, for example, the assets are equally divided between mother, wife, and children. And if assets go to mother, nothing wrong with it, but how will it go thereafter is not in your control. Are you doing things in your control, or are you leaving matters to fate? There is a very famous English saying that hope is not a strategy. You can't hope that things will go right. You need to ensure that you put a mechanism to get things right. And not having will is not an option at all. And therefore, what do? You prepare a will. And in will, if it is your self-earned asset, it is not an inherited property, it is not an HUF property, then you can decide whom to give what. Is that a right way to ensure succession? There is no yes or no answer here. Will has its own charm because it's very simple. You can write down whatever you want to write. You can change will anytime you want. So you could actually prepare a will over and over again, make whatever changes you want to make, and you can move on that basis. But equally, we are all aware, for example, that a will has challenges insofar as implementation is concerned, probate is concerned, disputes that could arise in the context of a will. And therefore comes an issue that is there a better way in which one can ensure succession planning? And as I mentioned, this is not to overturn the point which I made earlier about having a family constitution and all the things that go with that family constitution. But the question is there a way in which you could create a framework where you create a private trust? And I get this question asked very, very often, that why would one create a trust? And the beauty about a trust is that there are assets which you have. You are not going to take that assets with you when you are no longer on this planet. But you would like to control those assets while you are alive. So how do I ensure that my assets go for the benefit of my children, for the benefit of people to whom I want to inherit these assets, and at the same time, I control those assets while I am alive. So I don't get into, for example, a Raymond situation where I give the assets to my children and then my children ask me to be on the road. And nobody wants that. But if you have created a trust of which you make your children beneficiaries, then you have ensured at the same time that the people to whom benefit needs to grow can get the benefit. At the same time, you control those assets while you are alive. There's one other aspect which we sometimes forget. In business, there are profits and there are losses. There is no profit account. There's a profit and loss account. And we have all worked very, very hard to create the assets, to create the value that we have done over a period of decades. And then one fine day, there could be an unexpected event. There could be a loss, there could be a case for damages, there could be whatever else which can attach to our business. And the question is, if I have put my assets into a trust, have I created a separation between me and the assets such that, God forbid, if something went wrong, and I had to really go into bankruptcy or whatever else, then those assets are protected. And I'm not talking of doing something surreptitiously. I'm not talking of doing something with a view to avoiding payments. But if something goes wrong, if I have created a barrier between me and the assets in the form of a trust, then I have the assets, I have control of the assets, and I have got an ability to do whatever I want to do with it. There is a concept, and I get asked question very often, what are types of trust? And this is not a forum where I want to get into technicalities of what is a type of trust that you can create. But one very interesting framework is creating a discretionary trust. A discretionary trust is a trust where you put your assets into a trust, and it is up to your discretion as a managing trustee, as a group of trustees, to decide who is going to benefit. So you may today decide that my children are the beneficiaries, and you may not decide who will get what. It allows you a mechanism and elbow room to make a decision at an appropriate point of time as to what you should do, when you should do it. And that the beauty about this is that you can go on changing the beneficiaries. Therefore, the assets are totally in your control without being in your control. One of the reasons why discretionary trust became very, very popular was because of inheritance tax. The threat of inheritance tax. There is no estate duty today, there is no inheritance tax today, and thanks to all the comments made by Mr. Sam Pitroda, we may never have inheritance tax. But leaving that aside, one can never really budget. Again, as I said, hope can never be a strategy. I would think that it's a matter of time before a country like India is going to look at inheritance tax. I wrote an op-ed in Economic Times saying we should allow wealth to be created before we start taxing inheritance. But at some point of time, a country like India is bound to have inheritance tax. And the point is that if I have set up a discretionary trust, then during my lifetime, I have got rid of my assets. I no longer own the assets. The assets sit in the trust. When I die, nothing changes. It is only really the beneficiaries who are always there who will continue to benefit. And therefore, if at all there was to be an inheritance tax tomorrow, a discretionary trust is a very appropriate framework to take care of it. I won't go into lots of details on this, but as you decide as to what is the mode of succession, clearly not having anything is not a strategy. Doing nothing cannot be a strategy. Will has its own way, a trust has its own way, and one needs to consider a number of things. So for example, you cannot use a trust largely for immovable property, because putting an immovable property into a trust has its own stamp duty and other implications. If you want to put shares which are existing into a trust, again, there are tax issues, and a question arises, how do you plan to ensure that whatever assets you have got can go seamless without any tax implications into a trust? The final item which I wanted to talk about, and this comes up ever so often, that as businesses expand, as you start creating wealth in the country, most large families come back and say, we want to spread our risk. We believe that the value that we are generating is in India. At the same time, we want some base overseas. We don't want to have all our eggs in one basket. We would like to ensure that while bulk of our assets, our opportunities are in India, we have some part of the assets overseas. And that becomes a very, very important thing. How do you ensure that your assets are spread not only in India, but also overseas? And there are a number of things which can happen. Also, there's another aspect that most large families today have children who go overseas for studying, and many of them, for a variety of reasons, may decide to make overseas their home. Again, how do we ensure that a part of the wealth can go to them? And this becomes a subject in itself. It's not very easy. The government comes up with a number of propositions, and we see a number of flip-flop. So for example, a gift city, and many of you I'm sure are very familiar with gift city, is a very interesting example where the government came up with a proposition that if you set up a family office in gift city, you can have monies which are allowed to be remitted abroad. The scheme has been around for the last 3 years, and not a single approval has been granted by the Reserve Bank of India. But there are different things that you can do, all within the four corners of law, all legitimately, whereby you can ensure that you can use the ODI route, or what you call as the overseas direct investment route, as part of the LRS route. If a family member is overseas, then we are all aware, and I'm sure most of you are familiar, that if one family member becomes a non-resident, then the law allows $1 million a year to be remitted overseas, and all current income to be remitted overseas. How do you use that? Is there planning that one can do? Again, all legitimately within four corners of law. And there's a lot which one can do out here for both things. One, to ensure that if you wanted to spread your assets in India and overseas, you are able to do that. And if you have one of the family members overseas, how do you use that to spread your wealth in India and overseas? And if you start wanting to do overseas business, then that becomes sort of a pool of corpus which is available to you to do whatever you need to do. A question which comes up, and I know many of you might have it, is to HUF. And this is a very antiquated mode of succession planning. I don't think it has got too much of a value. There was a point of time when HUF became a taxable entity, and therefore you could take advantage of sort of inherited property. But if you have an HUF today, the laws around HUF have become increasingly complex. If an HUF happens when a karta passes away, how do assets get divided among the co-partners, etc., etc. And all that I would say at this point of time, briefly, is to say that maybe HUF is not really the most efficient way to carry on family wealth. We have seen most people who have got HUFs either completely or partially partition the HUF and ensure that the assets go to the respective family members rather than stay in an HUF. So, to summarize, the most important thing in the context of succession planning is to evolve a governance framework, to get a meeting of minds of the family members so they are driving in a direction which is unified. That there are family members who may be interested in business, there are family members who may not be interested in family business, but wealth may belong to different people. How do you ensure that control of business, management of the business, and the ownership of the business are diverse for each other? How do you provide a mechanism for settlement of not necessarily disputes, but how do you ensure that you provide a mechanism for resolution of difference of views? Because when you don't allow that difference of views to be resolved, that's when dispute starts to become large. As I said earlier, family members, different people are going to have different points of view. To think that those different points of view will not be there is utopia. It doesn't exist. What you need to do is to find a mechanism for resolution of the disputes. You need to find a mechanism for allocation of family assets to different businesses, because there are different businesses, each have their own requirements, each have their own commitments, and how do you ensure? How do you simplify complex holding structures? There was a point of time, and I hear this ever so often, that people used to create what we call as diamond structures, multiple holding companies with no line of sight as to who is the ultimate owner. Those are all gone situations. Today, you need to have a simple mechanism, you need to have a simplified structure. How do you identify trusted and nuclear advisors who can provide the right direction to the family, ensure that when there are differences, they are able to sort of act as mediators and ensure that everybody is able to come to a common platform, everybody is able to resolve those issues. And finally, somewhere along the line, I have seen, and maybe I don't want to sound chauvinistic here, but if bulk of the people I see here are males, and we believe that we understand our business, but we do not necessarily share the information which is relating to finance with our spouse. The most incorrect thing you can ever do, because you need to ensure that you are able to bring all the family members into this discussion. You can go on unilaterally thinking that you have all the knowledge and wisdom in the world because you created a business, but not realize that ultimately when you inherit, if the family members are not part of it, are not willing to, are not able to understand, then your legacy is unlikely to survive. That was all the points I wanted to share with you. I wanted to thank Prithviraj ji, wanted to thank Ashok bhai for inviting me here, and I hope this was very useful to you. Thank you. Sure, happy to take on questions. There are very, very few times where a consultant answers questions for free. So we will need to ask.
Sir, I am Shailendra Bardia from Jodhpur. My question pertains to probate. Sir, are you listening me? Hello. Sir. Sir, I'm asking you.
I think we need a mic there.
Yeah, I'm asking you. Here, on this side. I am Shailendra Bardia from Jodhpur, and my question pertains to probate. As you said, probate is mandatory only 3 cities, which is Chennai, Kolkata, and Mumbai.
I'm unable to follow you, honestly. Your voice is not coming properly.
Hello.
My question pertains to probate.
Hello.
My question.
I think there are multiple mics, and therefore,
Okay.
please.
My question pertains to probate. And probate is mandatory only in few cities, 3 cities. Now, especially this problem has arisen after COVID. The beneficiary of the will, he is going to the private banks along with the will and asking for return of the documents. Now, banks are insisting that they should provide probate. So what is exactly the legal position and how this problem should be resolved?
And again, I'm not too sure whether I've understood your question, but you are saying there are beneficiaries under the will,
Yes.
and those beneficiaries are asking for the benefits to be given to them.
No, not benefits. Suppose I am giving you a simple example. The testator, he has taken a house loan.
I think the voice is not coming to me. I'm really sorry for that.
Excuse me. Yeah, can I have one?
Sir, can I have here?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Yeah, this is Dinesh Kivesra from Bangalore. Excellent presentation, sir. I have seen several successful planning presentation. This is one of the best presentation I have seen in my life. I'm also a financial planner. I have seen, as I told you. I have one question to you, sir, because most of us are Jains here, and for Jains, as you told, Hindu succession planning is always applicable. But we are seeing incidents, sir. Say example, the main breadwinner is the husband, and we are seeing in accidents wherein the children's and spouse are no more. So are we going to pay the assets? Is my question to you, sir.
So as I mentioned to you, if you do not have a will, then the Hindu Succession Act comes into play. And the Hindu Succession Act, and maybe I can just take a minute and give you an example of something with which I began my career and which opened my eyes. And this goes to way back in 1980. We had a family which had come down to India from overseas, from Africa. Very, very wealthy family. And there was husband and wife, madly in love with each other. And the husband was a very accomplished person, a good businessman. He had done his Harvard. He was a musician, painter, whatever else. And he, on 2 days before Diwali, did a painting of his wife and was putting it on the wall when the nail hit his finger and he died of septic in 2 days' time. And he had not left anything. And half of the assets went to mother, another half went to wife. He had not left anything. And his wife was not aware of anything in the business. I mentioned to you, that was a real personal life example. And the family refused to give anything to her. There she was, they had no children at that point of time. And all that she wanted was a small house and a small car. She was not greedy. She must be now 75. She didn't marry again. And then when she came to us and to the lawyers and we filed a case, we actually ended getting her something like 300 crores of rupees, which is what she never budgeted. But really, a few things arise. If you don't have a will, assets are going to go as per Hindu Succession Act. Hindu Succession Act has a schedule which says how assets are to be divided. It goes in that class 1 heirs, class 2 heirs, etc. And again, the disadvantages of not keeping family members involved or aware of the businesses.
Prakash bhai, we are just running out of time. Crisp question, quickly, yeah, please.
Yeah, my question is very simple. You talk about the inherent tax. So really, the Modi government supposed to become definitely. तो इनके दिमाग में definitely ये बात थी, पर ये तो श्याम पिट्रोडा, राहुल गांधी ने थोड़ा jump लगा दिया, तो might be differ for 2-3 years. Otherwise, it will come. So you have to give some more light on it.
It's a very interesting question. And I have been asked this question for the last 10 years as to when is inheritance tax coming. And I don't know when it will come. Maybe it will get delayed thanks to, as you said, Sam Pitroda and Rahul Gandhi and all of that. But one thing, two comments I would like to make. One, as I said, hope cannot be a strategy. You plan for the worst and plan it in a manner that even if the inheritance tax does not come, you are no worse off, number one. And number two, I mentioned to you that when in the context of trust, how do you create a separation between you and the wealth so that if something goes wrong, your wealth is protected? So you put a structure around that, and most developed countries in the world today have an inheritance tax. It's a matter of time. It's a matter of when, not a matter of if. And if you start planning after the tax is announced, you could be stuck with what we call as avoidance provisions, general anti-avoidance or GAR provisions. If you have created structures when there was no inheritance tax, those structures can actually withstand the scrutiny of time. Thank you so much.